Y'all, it has been a hot minute since we've spilled some boba, but I am back and excited. That's why I got my excited boba here. All right, we're diving in to something super juicy, and it's one of my biggest pet peeves. I cannot stand Kanye-sized egos, and it shows up a lot in creative spaces. What we're used to seeing often are the loud Kanye-sized egos, right? They're out there always talking about themselves, putting themselves front and center. But more recently, I've realized there is also another kind of ego-driven personality that is a lot quieter, but equally as destructive and possibly more frustrating, because the quiet ego is often disguised as good intentions. Now, first of all, don't get me wrong, we all have egos, and a healthy ego is good for us. It drives us to pursue our dreams, to reach our goals. It helps give us a healthy sense of self-identity. So ego is good and we all have it. But where ego can get dangerous is when it gets in the way of our relationships, when it's self-serving. And so today I want to talk about the quiet ego that sometimes sneaks into our messaging and copy, and to be aware of it. Because our quiet egos can be unintentionally sabotaging our sales. Hey everyone, I'm Justine, messaging strategist and conversion copywriter for phenomenal, equity-driven, social impact-driven women of color, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and creatives, here to bring our brands alive with strategic messaging and storytelling that sells. All right, let's talk about 4 ways that our ego sometimes quietly sneaks into our messaging and copy. And the first way is the savior complex. So when I first started freelancing, I did some ghostwriting for some folks, and a couple of those were male CEOs. One of them in particular was the CEO of a tech company, and his team approached me to help him write his thought leadership piece. And he had written like a first draft, sort of a brain dump of ideas. And when I looked at it, I saw a great opportunity to make sure his powerful message and much needed message was actually heard. Because the way he wrote his piece, which was about how we need to support women in leadership roles, he clearly came from a very good place, well-intentioned, but there was a lot of white savior energy going on. And so I was excited to rewrite this piece for him, because I wanted to make sure that when we put it out there, it centered the cause, the mission, the purpose, the women, and not him. He did what a lot of folks do, which is like try to relate through personal storytelling. But again, it ultimately centered himself and gave off a savior complex energy. And what that can do is feel condescending, and it just separates you from the audience you want to connect with. That's the first way our ego sometimes slips into our messaging without intending to. You know, we come from a good place, we have a good cause, we have a good mission that we want to amplify and help realize. But the way we communicate this sometimes comes off more self-serving than we intend to. The second is the gotta prove it method, which is we tend to use a lot of jargon or speak in what we have been taught and conditioned is what sounds professional. But ultimately, all of that jargon, all of those nice sounding words, even if they're like empowering and inspiring, They don't mean much, and they make your audience have to think too hard. This can come from a sense of like, I gotta show them I'm qualified. I gotta show them that I know what I'm talking about. When we talk a lot of fluff and try to prove that we know this world, that we know what we're talking about, what we end up doing is just sending our message over our audience's head. And you have to remember, sadly, the average American reads at a 6th grade level. But this is not to say that you need to dumb it down for your audience or that your audience is not smart, because your audience is incredibly smart and intuitive. But we don't want to make them have to think too hard. Let me give you an example of work I did recently with a client. This client comes from education. She was a teacher, and now she's helping to reform the education industry. And when I first looked at her copy, it was very proper, it was very academic, sounded like more like a professor than a K through 12 teacher, as I would imagine. And her business was reaching out to other educators, talking to school district officials, teachers, school staff. And I told her, while her copy all sounds really good and smart, these teachers, these staff members, these school district officials, they are constantly getting inundated with pitches, with services, with information, and we need to simplify our language for them so that they don't have to think too hard and they can easily read what you send them and say, this is exactly what I need. Because even if your audience understands your jargon, when there's too much jargon, it creates disconnect. Keeping it simple helps your audience receive and digest the information much more easily, like it just naturally flows into them. You don't want to make your audience have to think too hard, because otherwise they'll be like, let me come back to this later. And then they might never come back to it. They might forget about it. Okay, all right. The third sneaky way that your ego might be creeping into your messaging is the me first narrative. If you've been around here and you know me, you know I've talked a lot about vampire energy and how we do not want to be giving off vampire energy in our content, in our copy, in our messaging, because that just sucks the energy away, right? And it drives people away. Now, I want to be clear about something. Many of us, especially nowadays, we share our stories to relate to our audience. And I'm not saying don't share your stories. I'm not saying do not talk about yourself. What I am saying is remember that when you share your stories, especially your personal stories, make sure your audience is at the center of your storytelling. Make sure they can see themselves in it. Don't just pull them in at the end as an afterthought. So like even your brand story and your about page, while it's about you, it's really about them, because you need to build that connection, that trust. And if they can see themselves in your story, that is how you build a genuine connection that keeps them engaged, keeps them wanting to be in your world. And the final way our ego sneaks in is when we don't like to take notes. Most people I work with are really good at taking notes, but there are some who sometimes resist the feedback I give them. One very sort of blatant example was I was working with someone on a project, and we were both collaborating and co-writing something. And as I often do, I read things late at night, put my notes in email, and I'm very detailed because especially in email, I know that things can be misconstrued, or if we're too vague, then there's too much back and forth. So I was trying to be very detailed and clear. But this was my first time sending this kind of feedback to this person. Just wanted to make sure he knew when I was being lighthearted about something, that I wasn't trying to be mean about anything, that I just wanted to be real. Put emojis in my feedback. And he did not like that. He came back to me and felt like I was giving him notes like an executive, not a collaborator. And that he didn't say this, but I'm assuming he felt like I was being condescending or just like instructing him from above instead of equally. And that is not what I was doing. At least it wasn't my intention. But I found throughout the process, this person really had trouble taking my feedback and taking a lot of people's feedback, and actually applying their feedback, even when he did seem to register the feedback. This really is one of the most harmful things you can do with your work, because especially when writing, even if you're writing by yourself, we need other eyes, other brains, we need perspective, we need people who have experiences that we don't, to bring to light what we might have missed, what we might not have realized came off a certain way, the holes. Like when I write, for example, my scripts, I always have my manager, who's a brilliant storyteller and editor. I always have her read my scripts because she can help me pick out the holes that I've got. Or if I'm like struggling with an area, she can help me like untangle my brain. We need collaborators. Collaboration is how we produce truly impactful, meaningful work that connects with our audience. So sometimes we've got to check ourselves. Are we feeling defensive every time someone gives us feedback? Or are we seeing that the feedback is really helping us improve our work? Because like in screenwriting, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in screenwriting was that notes don't mean that your writing is bad. It just means that some things might not be as clear as you think they are. So let your walls down and let the feedback come in. You don't have to take everyone's advice or every piece of advice. Even with my manager, who is not just a brilliant storyteller and editor, she's made incredible films. She'll give me suggestions that I don't always agree with, but we talk it through and we figure it out. So when we want to put out our best work, when we want to make sure our messaging travels to where it needs to go and translates how it needs to translate, collaboration is key. All right, so those are the 4 ways our egos can quietly creep into our messaging and hurt us more than help us. The savior complex, the need to prove it, always putting ourselves at the center and creating vampire energy, and not being able to take notes. What this ultimately costs us is alienating our audience, like when we are coming in as the savior, confusing or making our audience work too hard when we're just trying to prove we know what we're doing, sucking out all the energy from our audience and preventing real connection when it's all me first, and stalling our own growth and keeping us from putting out messaging that is on brand when we aren't able to take feedback. Take constructive criticism. So remember, you don't need to save your audience. They are very capable and they are very smart and intuitive. You don't need to prove your expertise with jargon. Yes, we want to build trust through our own authority, through our own credibility, but clarity often is the greatest proof. And remember, your story matters, especially when it's in service of others. So, what are the ways that your ego is creeping into your messaging? If you found this BOBA insightful and helping you think about your messaging in a new way, make sure to subscribe to the Red Balloon Station channel, follow or connect with me on LinkedIn, and sign up for my newsletter for more juicy ways to bring our brands alive and tap into your own magic. See y'all soon. Toodles!